Okay, I'm going to get started. My name is Don Bowman. My company is Agilicus, and we make it really easy for people to do secure remote access into industrial environments, PLC, HMI, your customer, your plant, whether it's wastewater treatment, it's energy, it's manufacturing, it's food. They all have a bunch of things in common, and they have a bunch of older technology that is very specific in its domain and hasn't really modernized to become SaaS and move to the cloud because it is where it is. And we just make that really easy to use that from a remote location with any user with multi-factor authentication in a secure fashion. And today we're going to talk about one of the trends that we're seeing, which is, that equipment is increasingly becoming more specialized, where a couple decades ago, a generalist would do everything, the structured wiring and the installation of the controls. Today you've got people that are focused on individual areas, and as a consequence, commissioning is becoming a cast of thousands rather than a generalist with a screwdriver. And we think that that means there's going to be an increased amount of remote support, whether it's remote operations, so ongoing, or whether it's just, maintenance, break fix, whether it's warranty, etc. And we're going to talk about that skill set gap that's arriving there. And then another one that I want to talk about is the SaaSification of systems. In the past, the industrial environment was considered a bit of an air gap. You put something in there, you didn't patch it, you kept it away from the internet, and nothing bad happened, and it just sort of lived its life. And now what's happening is, people are looking at business models like Tesla, where you ship a car before it's quite ready, or games do that, and they update it in the field. We're looking at people like John Deere that have taken what used to be a capital purchase of a tractor and made it into a subscription. So you can't buy it unless you're there. And the big data, the cloud, the predictive analytics, this, that, and the other thing, it's really making it more difficult to have that simple air gap do its thing. We'll talk about the operator perspective. So there's two different perspectives we see in the world. One second, my stupid light in this room. Two different perspectives we see in the world. The first is the operator. So this is my plant. I own it. It's my butt on the line when something goes wrong. And then we see the partner perspectives. I support a number of different operators, and they each have different systems and different rules and regulations, and that's a cost or a burden on me. I can't possibly have everybody's VPN installed. I can't have credentials for every one of those. They're multi-factor. How do I share that across my team? And talk about those two perspectives. And they currently lead to a bit of a moral hazard where one of the parties doesn't own the risk and is incented to increase the risk to simplify. The other owns the risk but doesn't own the execution. So managed remote operations, what's happening here is systems are getting more complex. The number of PLCs, the amount of logic in each, the number of sensors, and it's being driven by efficiency. We're trying to get more and more out of the resources we have. We're trying to have less and less waste, use less chemicals, where there's more regulation about emissions and so on, and that's driving a more complex system. And also those sensors are getting cheaper. So the electronics, Moore's law, has driven downwards in costs. So very, very cheap things can now have a lot of sensors in them. In the past they wouldn't. We're also seeing sort of IT systems that intersect into the plant, particularly in manufacturing. You see the ERP systems, so something like SAP, it's shared by your contract manufacturer, and then with devices like a label printer that straddle the IT and the OT network. You got like a zebra printer that's printing some nice glossy label that's suitable for the environment. And how does that work? Is it inside the air gap? Is it outside the air gap? Something like ERP at a manufacturing station, how does it span it? And then the other area that is driving this sort of interconnectedness is license managers. So, as manufacturers are putting more money into software, they're looking to ensure that they get paid. And instead of what used to be like a parallel port dongle back when I started my career, is now an internet-based license server. You have to punch a hole in your firewall for that. But you also sometimes see off-net databases and historians used. And that efficiency is the driver. Everybody wants better mean time to repair. So that means when you have a specialist, you want to be able to get them to the site as quick as possible. What's the quickest way to do it? It's from where they are right now with their armchair. And what's the most safe way to do it? Well, it's Agilicus AnyX. So the SaaSification. So it's occurring in all industries. I put a picture of a tractor that probably is not the one that John Deere is retrofitting with a cellular modem and satellite connectivity. That one's a little bit older in nature, but it's happening in all industries. We saw it years ago with the CD. You went from a capital purchase, you went to HMV and spent $20 and you bought something, to music as a service where you just rent it. The side effect of this is you get more people involved, more network connectivity, and it increases your risk as an operator because now you become as weak as the weakest of your partners. And what you're worried about is one of them finds a juicy looking USB key in the parking lot and plugs it in and blows up everybody all at once. And that's sort of what happens when you have a VPN style interconnected mesh. But on the other side, you kind of have to because you have devices talking, Ethernet IP or Modbus or things like that that are kind of layer 2 technologies, and you kind of need a VPN. What's the solution? Big data. So, as a remote support person, you often care solely about little data. I want the log file from that device, or I want to know what the LED is doing right now, or something like that. But at the other end of the spectrum, you're moving from monthly compliance reports to sort of millisecond level values, and those are driving real-time control systems. And you need to be able to diagnose all of the pieces. That might mean you need access into the Amazon or Google or Azure cloud. You might need access to the industrial automation floor. You might need access to the HMI to be able to confer on all these things, and they're not all in the same network anymore. And that's the consequence. You start to realize a VPN is not an appropriate tool for remote access. And that's what Zero Trust comes in, is it makes it easier for you to have access to things you need without necessarily needing to be network adjacent to them. So if I talk about those roles, so this is something that I try to keep straight in my head because it really matters how people's perspectives. They're not necessarily wrong, any one of them, but they are not necessarily aligned. So if it's your plant, you're the demographic of I operate. And what do you think, hear, feel, see, and do? I own the infrastructure. The risk is mine. So you're risk adverse. I want to make sure that everybody is very, very careful. I want to make sure that I have an audit trail for everybody. I want multi-factor authentication. I want to have identity. If you're coming on site, I need you to sign in. Workplace health and safety, I need to make sure you've got your hat and your boots on and so on. When you get to the I manage demographic, so this is sometimes a system integrator that runs something on an ongoing basis. Sometimes it's somebody that is doing remote support or remote operations. You have a number of customers, and they're all different. And they each have their own ideas of risk and how they've implemented things. But you want your team to be efficient. You want everybody to work the same way. And what you want to be able to say is, my team can log into customer 1 and then customer 2 and then customer 3 with really no barrier. Instantaneously switch between them because sometimes there's trouble tickets coming in. Customer 2 has an emergency. I need to log in. Okay, I'm looking at the HMI. Okay, I see there's a bug in my HMI code. I'm going to upload a new version for you. Or, oh, we need to tweak something in this PLC, or I need to look at its tags. What you don't want to hear is, well, we actually have to have a separate laptop for each customer because they each have a different VPN version and I can't have 2 VPNs installed at the same time. What you don't want to hear is, well, they're using multi-factor authentication and it's only for their staff, so we can't use it. They've created one account for us. How do I share the multi-factor across my team? This is a red flag. If you hear that and you're thinking, how do we share multi-factor? And you're thinking, I can do an SMS reflector and use SMS as multi-factor and send it to everybody, you've made a mistake. And there's where your gap comes in. The I operate demographic wants to control risk. The I manage demographic wants to maximize simplicity. I say it seems like a gap. I believe that that's a zero-sum view of the world. To increase security, decrease simplicity. I don't believe in that statement. I believe you can actually do both at the same time. And then you go through the other demographics. I design. They specify equipment, etc. I build. Build in your panel shop, do the PLC programming. I support. It breaks, I fix it, etc. They each have slightly different views of security, remote, cost, those trade-offs there. But what's happening is, as things get more complicated, you start to get more and more parties involved, and you get multiple people in each of these roles. It's not a single system integrator, it's 3. They're all working on the site at the same time. You don't want one of them to accidentally do something to the other's equipment. oh, it's a manufacturing plant, there's 5 production lines, and you thought you were upgrading the robot arm on line 1 that had the safety pin in, but you accidentally updated the one on line 2, which was in production, and it swung around and hurt somebody. These roles have a different view of things, but this is primarily a presentation about the top 2 roles and how they have approached the world, and what Zero Trust does to sort of bridge that gap. So in terms of challenge perspectives, so you think about that elephant on the right, and you've got 5 people that are blindfolded that are talking to it or touching it. Somebody says it's a snake. I don't know what kind of snake is going to feel like an elephant's trunk, but it's a big snake. Somebody touches the side of it and thinks it's a wall. Somebody is playing around with the tail and thinks it's a rope. Tails are a little bit high on the elephant, but anyway, you get the idea. Somebody owns the risk, and somebody else owns influencing them to accept more risk, but they don't have a downside to it. It's what we call a moral hazard. It's what happened in 2008 when a bunch of bankers were able to gamble but didn't have any downside, and it hurt the housing market. The idea is there's a battleground here rather than a common ground, and that's around the concepts of identity. So who you sign in as. In our system, you sign in as yourself, your native credentials, even if you don't work for that company. So you sign in as Jane at X when you're working on customer Y. You don't sign in as contractor at X as a shared account. You don't sign in anything other than yourself. It creates a perfect audit trail, etc. But that identity connecting and policy battleground, when you have these 2 things fighting, it's inefficient, and it ends up with bad decisions made. If we can make that a common ground where everybody has their native identity, connectivity becomes trivial, and then policy is the only thing left, then it actually becomes pragmatic rather than acrimonious, these discussions. So that identity battleground, identity is a complicated thing for people to understand, but for most people, it's their email address, right? So you think about if you use Google Workplace or you use Office 365, you sign in and you have a username and password and multi-factor, and you have all of your tools. You have Word or Google Docs, and you have Gmail or Outlook, and all those things together. That's called single sign-on. And that identity can be used in much more broad context. And that's really what we're talking about, is being able to use that identity to open up Rockwell Studio 5000 and program a PLC that's 2,000 kilometers away in a customer site without a VPN, without having to rejig your network. And at the same time, be able to have that same Rockwell open and look at 2 PLCs on 2 different sites as if they were in one project. Look at the tags in real time. Update the HMI that you have, or use it remotely via VNC. Using that identity to prove who you are, that pushes the burden of HR to your company. Oh, that person got fired, I removed them from my identity system. Your partners don't have to know about that instantaneously. That's one of the challenges. If your partners create an account for people in your company and somebody in your company leaves on bad terms, how do they get notified? Worse, you've done a shared account. So if you move the identity battleground out to each of the companies that support you, then use that and say, I own what that's allowed to do. This then is what Zero Trust is about. There's 3 phases to Zero Trust: the who, the what, the how. Who are you? Single sign-on with that non-shared identity, whether it's local passwords on site with Active Directory or whatever. It makes it better. And the alternatives that happen are really bad. A few years ago in Florida, they had the Oldsmar water plant had this issue with TeamViewer, where they just created a shared account on it. And they're like, hey, we all trust each other, right? But then somebody used that shared account on something else, and something bad happened, and bad things happen. So that's what we call shadow IT. You have people that are making a decision on a pragmatic basis, saying, look, none of us want to drive to this water treatment plant out of town late at night. There's alligators and stuff out there. There's not a lot of streetlights. Who wants that? Let's just install TeamViewer and just not tell anybody. We know how to trust each other. We'll use a cellular VPN like E1. We'll create these shadow users, and away we're good. And you're often good because those people are inherently trustworthy. But one day one of them leaves the company, or has a gambling problem, or leaves their password written on a post-it note, or uses it in another system that gets breached, and boom. A little bit less than a month ago, 20 days ago, TeamViewer had a bit of a breach, which was a wake-up call for a lot of us, because TeamViewer is very commonly used here, and it could have very systematically breached the world. So when we talk about Zero Trust, it sounds like a big, complicated concept, and there's certainly a lot of literature written on it. But the one thing to realize is this is a best practice. It's a best practice from all avenues. You see it from federal and state and provincial government levels. You see it from technical things, standards bodies, NIST and CSA, etc. And what they're really saying is this is an architecture you need to include as part of your balanced security. It's not a panacea where you switch to this and turn everything else off. But zero trust is a very simple concept, which is instead of a VPN, which is intrinsically a long Ethernet cable, here's a long Ethernet cable between your building and mine, and I can access anything over it. I'll just try to stay in my area, thanks. Well, that's not really that secure. What if your machine, you click on that phishing link and boom, you blow up their plant? So zero trust is three things. The first is who. Who are you? I identify you. You sign in the same way you sign into your email. Single sign-on, no new usernames, no new passwords, multi-factor, very strong, but also very simple and elegant for the end user, very understandable, nothing new to train on. And you don't get another username and password for any new system. You don't have to remember and have a little spreadsheet, okay, that machine is this, and this machine is that, and this customer is done this way. It's just you are all your team, everybody in your company. They have to focus on, I know how to log into my email, therefore I can do that for anything. The next phase is called the what problem, or authorization. That's what are you allowed to do. So the who is who you are. Proving that you are who you say you are doesn't mean there's anything specific you're allowed to do. What are you allowed to do? Okay, well, it's after 5 p.m. You're allowed to do maintenance on PLC3 and rack 5. Okay, that's a what problem. So this is assigning permissions. You're intersecting who that user is with their role, with some other rules like time and GeoIP, and you're deciding, okay, what they're trying to do is allowed. And the last part is how. How do I get you there? So in remote access terms, people think about VPNs. VPN is a sort of long Ethernet cable. It's layer 3 adjacent. But here with Zero Trust, we talk about it on an individual resource basis. So you have access to PLC3 and rack 2 and nothing else. It means even if you maliciously try to access the others, they're not there. They don't have an IP address that you can reach. They're just not there. They won't show up for you. So in the tools that you use on your desktop, again, my example, Rockwell Studio, that one PLC will go green, it's online, and nothing you do will make the others work if you don't have access to them. But all of the ones you have access to will go green. So if you've got who, what, and how sorted out on a per individual person, not shared account basis, and a per resource basis, not plant, not building, not customer, if those are individual rules that go through that what engine, you have zero trust. And again, it doesn't replace your firewall and it doesn't replace antivirus and those other things, but it is actually substantively more simple for the end user because they get to treat every resource as if it was on the public internet. You get to sit in a coffee shop or the side of the road in your truck with your tablet out, and you're able to poke at that HMI. Your customer calls and says, "Oh my God, the process is out of control," and you're like, "Let me get on the HMI in a hurry." Bam, move over the side of the road, tablet, LTE modem, click, 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 boom, it's right there. You're like, "Oh, I see what's happened. They've got put it into test mode, and it's not showing real stats or something like that." You want to get rid of the concept of having to connect to the network as a sort of well-known shared user, and instead replace it with your normal identity, if you have permission, can do the action regardless of the network. So this becomes a holistic solution. There's no VPN involved, and you can do those things like, I need SAP inventory print at the final assembly station. My executive needs real-time dashboards for all the divisions. It's stored locally on the site. They want to be able to get it. My vendor needs diagnostic logs. They want the logs out of the blah, blah, blah process, the building management system, the camera access, etc. My integrator needs to upgrade line 5, building 2. They need to attach their PLC software and reprogram the firmware in it. Our BMS and HVAC needs outbound license manager. Every one of those flows, there's a who, there's a what, and there's a how in it. And it becomes zero trust, and they each operate as if they were their own universe. They don't know about each other. They can't get to each other. Only the flows that are allowed for the users that are allowed are able to function. And what's the nice thing about it is it's actually simpler for everybody involved. So these two screens show sort of the login experience of a notional person using Azure and a notional person using Google Workplace. But it can also be Gmail or Hotmail or any of those things. There's no password involved. You do not have a password in the system. There's nothing to breach because it is your normal sign-in experience. I should have set these to loop, but this is our Azure backdrop here. It's the same HTML the user always sees. That's really good for spear phishing prevention. If you teach your team that there's a lot of different usernames and passwords to sign in with, then your team is going to be easily tricked by some trickster coming along and saying, hey, we created a new account for you, sign in. If you have only one sign-in experience for everything and it always looks the same, they're going to be trained to look, okay, the little green lock up here and the right URL, and it looks just right. And that way, and there's no more passwords to remember. One of my favorite pieces of trivia is the song Wonderwall by Oasis, which really sticks in your head once you think about it. What's the story, Morning Glory? Has 88 words. The average user has 101 passwords, more than all of the words in the song Morning Glory. Do you think you could memorize an entire song and remember each word as a password to a system? No, you share them or you write them down. This is why it's so much more secure to use single sign-on, single authentication, and then let the network take care of what you're allowed to do. There's also a request and acknowledge flow, so the user can say, I would like access to this, and the administrator can say, oh, it's okay, I know who that person is, yes, they're allowed, and that allows you to that idea of that safety pin that's in it, or putting it into stop mode or something like that. The other nice thing about not having a VPN is you can work just in a browser, and you don't have to worry about client software. Client software is very difficult to manage. The I operate demographic, they can dictate it. All of the users that work for me have a company issued laptop, and it goes on there. As soon as you get into the system integrators and so on that support them, those people don't have a laptop you issued. You can't dictate what software they have. They're not going to pay for the licenses for it. So here, the lowest common denominator, I guarantee you every device they use has a browser on it. I guarantee it. Somebody's probably got a VIC-20 in the closet somewhere, but really 100% of these users have a proper identity through Google or Microsoft and have a device which has a browser on it. Whether it's a phone, it's a tablet, it's Mac, it's Linux, it's Windows, it doesn't really matter. That's the lowest common denominator. So most of what we do is browser only, but the sign-in experience is always browser-based. Some things aren't capable of that. Coming back to my Rockwell Studio 5000, it's not exactly a browser-based website, but it's able to launch, use the browser as a helper to get signed in, and then have pinpoint network connectivity due to our plugins. So we think about this idea of shared custody and shared destiny. So coming back to the idea about remote support, we have a shared destiny. We both want success. So whether you are the demographic of iOperate and somebody's remotely supporting you from iManage, or whether you're the demographic of iManage and you're supporting someone that's iOperate, you both want it to be successful. Nobody wants something bad to occur. But you think about that little Venn diagram at the right, where partner one and the customer and partner two and the customer work together. So we propose they come together in that authentication layer, the who layer, and partner one manages their team and partner two manages their team and the customer manages their team professionally with that single sign-on. And then the authorization is the shared custody and shared destiny. And that allows that vendor at acme.org to be able to use the HMI as needed under the trust model that they've built together. The problem is if you bring that in as a VPN, they have access to everything, and sometimes that trust gets inadvertently broken. I keep clicking on the wrong window here. The operator challenges. So, the main challenges here are I own the risk. Security is very important to me. My staff also need remote access sometimes. I have rules, whether they're internal or industry, or it doesn't really matter. They have rules they need to comply with. And they made choices, and they have to audit them and demonstrate that they're, controlling their rules. They often don't have a lot of control, though. The vendor dictates. Look, I chose to buy this thing from John Deere as a tractor, and they're telling me I can't have it unless it has internet access. I don't normally allow internet access, but what am I going to do? One of my customers, they bought this chiller from Siemens, and then the Siemens chiller is like, you can't buy it unless it has connectivity back to Siemens. They won't sell it to you. And they're like, well, but our plants aren't set up that way. There's nothing on the plant floor that has outbound internet access. It's all one big layer 2 network. If I allow them out, then I allow everything out, yada, yada, yada. That's where zero trust comes in. You can say, well, that chiller is an identity. It's a who. And the authorization is it's allowed to its home base, and that's the what. The more complex it gets for the operator, the more they have to just trust. They get a system integration, they get a cabinet that comes, and inside that cabinet with a single sticker on the front is a bunch of different vendors. And inside some of those vendors is in turn another set of vendors. It's like one of those Russian Matryoshka dolls. And eventually you find that you have something at the bottom of it that's very, very brittle or very insecure. And you don't know, you don't really know what's inside there. You have to just sort of trust that your vendor's doing the right thing. It's called a supply chain risk. And this is what zero trust is about, is preventing that blast radius from going too far. Remote support is expensive hourly, but on-site support is even more expensive. So they really want you to be efficient at your job to minimize the cost to them. The iManage demographic, their challenges are, look, I cannot deal with all my customers being so different. What am I supposed to do? Have a virtual machine for each customer that's always on and always VPN'd into their network? That doesn't make any sense. They each tell me these different rules, and I can't obey them all because some of them conflict. They want a VPN, but that one wants a different VPN. I can't have two VPNs installed on the same laptop. I don't own the licenses. They want to use multi-factor, but they want to use these FIDO keys that only they issue and I don't have access to, and or they're willing to give me one, but I got a team of 5. What are we going to do? Drive to each other's house to hand off the key when we're on call? Like, this is not very fun. I just want convenience. Driving is an inefficient use of my time. I don't want to drive to the customer site. That's a lost opportunity. Those billable hours, I could have been billing them out at a higher rate for somebody else. So you see that the two challenges here meet in the middle if you can get that authentication problem solved and then the access problem solved. So with that, these are some of the challenges and so on associated with remote support. We think that our solution is an excellent one for it, Agilicus AnyX. A lot of our customers agree. And we'd love if you would contact us afterwards, or we can contact you and talk about your challenges there. But if you are a system integrator, we're a great company to partner with. We can become part of your toolkit. You can run us on behalf of your customer, and it's a very profitable endeavor. We have some case studies on that. If you're an operator, we've become a great platform to disaggregate your support staff so they have a single way in. Whether you call that vendor access management or anything like that, is really what we're talking about here. This is an easy thing to deploy. It's a proxy. It doesn't require any changes to your existing firewall. It doesn't require any changes to your existing systems. You can incrementally deploy it one user at a time, one person, one system at a time. It's not a big bang theory. It's predominantly SaaS, so it's a small piece of software to install on site. It installs on nearly anything: Raspberry Pi, MikroTik, Ubiquiti, Linux machine, Windows machine, any industrial PC. There's a bunch of PLCs that run this now: the Phoenix Contact, PLC Next, the Wago, and a bunch of other devices like that, Schneider's, SCADAPAC. These are all platforms that this software runs, makes an outbound connection to our cloud, parks it. Your user comes along, proves who they are, proposes what they want to do, tunnels it back through. They see it transparent as if they're on the public internet, full encryption for everything, and then all those legacy things shine through. PLC tags and Ethernet IP, Common Industrial Protocol, Modbus, HMI, VNC, all the great acronyms that we know and love. With that, if there are any questions, I will take them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending today, and we will follow up afterwards. Okay, seeing no questions, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today. Cheers. Bye-bye.